2003, archaeologists digging in the desert sand near Abydos, Egypt, uncovered something that made almost no sense. 10 skeletons laid to rest in a set of mud brick tombs, wrapped with the same care given to royalty, arranged in a row beside the funerary complex of one of Egypt's earliest kings. Not one of them was human. They were donkeys, positioned like an honor guard, ready to march into the afterlife beside a pharaoh who ruled 5,000 years ago. For an animal that history later reduced to a punchline, a stubborn, slow-witted beast fit only for hauling junk, this looked like a strange kind of tribute, and here's the part that makes it stranger. Modern research into animal behavior suggests that what humans spent centuries calling stupidity in a donkey might actually be something closer to caution, memory, and calculated risk assessment. Put that next to a horse, an animal we've spent thousands of years worshiping as noble and brilliant, and the comparison gets uncomfortable fast. So which one actually had the sharper mind? To find out, we have to go back even further than Egypt's first dynasty, to a dry, sunburned stretch of African wilderness, where a wary, unglamorous creature was about to change the course of human civilization. Nobody watching it that day had any idea. Long before pyramids, before riding, before the wheel had rolled a single mile, the ancestors of the modern donkey roamed the arid grasslands of northeast Africa in small, cautious herds. Scientists call them African wild asses, and calling their environment unforgiving would be an understatement. Almost no water, brutal heat, predators waiting in every patch of shade. Survival there required something most grazing animals never had to develop: patience and the discipline to think before moving. Somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago, somewhere in northeast Africa, early herders managed to tame this wary desert survivor. Nobody recorded who did it first. There was no scribe standing nearby with a reed pen. But the outline archaeologists have pieced together is bigger than most people realize, because this wasn't only an animal being tamed. It was the start of something that would reshape how humans moved through the world. Here's a detail that tends to surprise people. Donkeys were domesticated before horses by a wide margin. While horses were still running wild across the steppes of Central Asia, untouched by human hands, donkeys were already at work, carrying water, grain, and goods across desert terrain that few other animals could tolerate for long. Camels hadn't entered the picture yet either. For a critical stretch of early human history, the donkey was exceptionally well suited to a job almost nothing else could do well: moving goods reliably across hostile, dry landscapes where a wrong step or a collapsed animal could mean disaster for an entire settlement. That didn't make it the single origin point of all long-distance trade. Exchange between distant peoples existed in various forms before this. But it did mean donkeys dramatically expanded the scale, the reliability, and the reach of overland transport in a way nothing before them had managed. Without that shift, ancient Egypt's growth might have looked very different. Its links to the copper mines of the Sinai, its trade toward the Red Sea, its ability to move grain along the length of the Nile. That's what makes those 10 donkeys at Abydos worth pausing on again. In a civilization that depended on moving food and goods across deadly terrain just to survive, an animal that made that possible wasn't just useful, it was foundational. Burying donkeys beside a king wasn't a strange or sentimental gesture. It was a statement about what actually kept that civilization running. But this was only the beginning of the donkey story, and it wasn't going to stay this respected for long. Around 4,000 years ago, a new animal entered the scene, and it arrived with an entirely different reputation already built in: the horse. Domesticated on the grasslands far to the north, horses were fast, powerful, and visually dramatic in a way donkeys never tried to be. Once horses were harnessed to chariots, they became instruments of speed, warfare, and status. Kings didn't want to be painted riding a slow, cautious donkey into battle. They wanted the image of a warrior thundering forward behind galloping horses, dust exploding in their wake. And here's the twist worth sitting with. The horse didn't actually replace the donkey's usefulness. Donkeys kept doing the same essential work they'd always done: hauling, farming, carrying, connecting villages to markets. What the horse replaced was the donkey's place in the human imagination. Horses became linked to kings, conquest, and glory. Donkeys quietly got sorted into a different category: ordinary, practical, beneath notice. And once that sorting happened, it became very hard to undo. This is where the real tragedy of the donkey's story begins, not in its usefulness, but in its image problem. So let's actually look at the intelligence question directly, because this is where things get genuinely interesting. Researchers studying donkey behavior and cognition have found strong evidence of long-term memory, the ability to recognize familiar terrain, other animals, and specific humans, sometimes even after years of separation. In controlled learning and problem-solving tasks, donkeys hold their own against horses, showing memory and reasoning skills that challenge old assumptions. But the more important finding isn't really about which species scores higher on a given test. It's about how each animal is wired to respond to danger and how differently humans have judged those responses. Horses evolved on open plains where the safest response to a threat was to run first and process the danger later. Speed was survival. Donkeys evolved in rocky, arid terrain, often alone or in very small groups, where sprinting blindly could mean a broken leg, a fall from a ledge, or running straight into a predator instead of away from one. So donkeys evolved to do something different. They pause, they assess, they weigh the danger against the terrain before committing to move. Neither strategy is dumber than the other. They're just different solutions shaped by different landscapes. The problem is that humans, especially soldiers and traders in a hurry, interpreted a horse's panic as spirit and a donkey's hesitation as stupidity, when in both cases the animal was simply doing exactly what evolution had trained it to do. Think about how much of human language still carries that misunderstanding. Calling someone a jackass isn't a compliment. Calling someone stubborn as a mule wasn't meant kindly either. An animal that was actually performing careful risk assessment, drawing on instincts sharpened over millions of years, got rebranded as difficult and worthless, mostly because that caution was inconvenient for the humans trying to rush it across a bridge or into gunfire. And this misunderstanding didn't just shape everyday language, it shaped religion and politics too. In the ancient Near East, rulers understood exactly what each animal symbolized, and they used that meaning deliberately. A horse meant war, conquest, and dominance. A donkey meant something else: humility, peace, a ruler who came without the threat of the sword. When the Hebrew Bible describes Solomon's coronation, the moment he's confirmed as heir to his father David's throne, he doesn't arrive on a war horse surrounded by chariots. He arrives on David's own mule, a deliberate signal that his reign would be defined by peace rather than conquest. Centuries later, that same symbolic language echoes through one of the most famous entrances in religious history, when Jesus is described riding into Jerusalem not on a war horse fit for a conquering general, but on a young donkey, a quiet statement to everyone watching that this was not a king coming for battle. These stories aren't historical proof of donkey behavior. They're proof of something else. that ancient people fully understood the symbolic gap between these two animals and chose their mounts specifically because everyone already knew what riding one meant. What happened next changed the donkey's story again, in a way almost nobody expects. As trade routes expanded across the Mediterranean and the Near East, breeders began experimenting with crossing a male donkey and a female horse. The result was the mule, bigger and stronger than a donkey, but calmer and more sure-footed than a horse, able to carry heavy loads over brutal terrain while needing less water and suffering fewer injuries. Even after donkeys had been culturally demoted to the animal of the poor, humanity kept quietly relying on donkey genetics to build one of history's most valuable working animals. Ancient Greek and Roman armies leaned on mules for logistics horses simply couldn't handle. Centuries later, Spanish colonizers pushed mule trains along the narrow, punishing paths of the Andes Mountains, where a single misstep meant a fatal fall, and it wasn't horses making that crossing possible. It was mules, carrying silver and supplies through terrain that had broken countless other animals. The donkey's greatest strengths didn't disappear when its reputation collapsed. They just kept working quietly, hidden inside another animal's bloodline. And the human stories connected to the donkey only grow more powerful from here. In 1915, during the brutal Gallipoli campaign of the First World War, a British-born stretcher-bearer serving with the Australian Imperial Force, John Simpson Kirkpatrick, began using a donkey abandoned near the front lines to carry wounded soldiers down from the fighting in Monash Valley to the beach at Anzac Cove. Day after day, often under direct sniper and shrapnel fire, Simpson and his donkey, remembered by different men as Murphy, Abdul, or Duffy, made the same brutal run through what one officer described as almost constant fire. He kept this up for 3.5 weeks until he was killed by machine gun fire on the 19th of May, 1915, while carrying wounded men to safety. In the years after his death, Simpson's story grew into legend, sometimes reported as having saved as many as 300 men, a figure historians now treat with some caution, since many of those he carried would have needed to be walking wounded rather than stretcher cases. But the exaggeration doesn't erase the core of what actually happened. A quiet, previously overlooked animal helped one man save lives under conditions almost nobody else survived, and their partnership became one of the most enduring images to come out of that entire war. If a story like that changes how you think about donkeys, drop a comment and let us know, because it's had that effect on more than a few historians too. That same combination of memory, environmental awareness, and calm decision-making under stress kept showing up in far less famous settings. During the American gold rush of the mid-1800s, prospectors in the desert Southwest depended heavily on donkeys, often called burros. Frontier stories often credited burros with remarkable memories of trails and water sources, and with an uncanny ability to sense danger, although many of those stories are difficult to verify today. Nobody could fully explain it at the time. Today, researchers studying equine spatial memory suggest that strong root memory and sensitivity to environmental cues could help explain why donkeys can navigate familiar terrain so effectively, the same traits that had helped their wild ancestors survive in the desert for thousands of years, now quietly protecting the humans who depended on them. Here's the part of the story that almost never gets told, though. The donkey never actually vanished from human life. It simply vanished from the attention of wealthy, industrialized societies. Across large parts of Africa, Asia, and Latin America today, in places where tractors and trucks remain financially out of reach for most families, donkeys still plow fields, still haul water, still carry firewood and crops to market. For millions of small-scale farmers, a single healthy donkey can be the difference between a family eating that season or not. 5,000 years ago, a donkey's back carried the water and grain that kept ancient Egyptian cities alive. Today, in different countries, under a different sun, donkeys are still doing exactly that. The story never actually ended. It just stopped being visible to the parts of the world that had the luxury of forgetting. And this is where the story takes a much darker and much more urgent turn. Over the past 2 decades, rising demand for a traditional Chinese remedy called jiao, made by processing collagen from donkey hides, has triggered what animal welfare researchers now describe as a genuine global crisis. Industry estimates suggest China's jiao production requires millions of donkey hides every year, a demand that domestic Chinese donkey farming has not been able to supply on its own. That gap has driven a fast-growing international trade in donkey hides sourced from Africa, Asia, and South America. According to reporting from equine welfare organizations, China's own donkey population has fallen substantially since the early 1990s, and several other countries have documented sharp declines in donkey numbers in the years since this export trade accelerated. In places where a single donkey can represent a family's entire ability to farm, haul water, or transport goods, this isn't a distant statistic. It is a direct threat to household survival. Since the mid-2010s, a growing number of African nations have moved to restrict or ban the export of donkey skins entirely, recognizing that an animal barely respected after thousands of years of service is now under enough pressure to threaten livelihoods and, in some regions, regional food security. The same creature that helped build some of the earliest trade networks in human history is now caught in the middle of a very modern and far more predatory one. It's a strange kind of irony. An animal humanity underestimated for most of recorded history is now disappearing in some regions faster than researchers can track. And most people watching this video have probably never thought about a donkey's well-being even once. But there's a genuine flicker of hope woven into this part of the story too, and it connects directly back to where we started. In 1969, a British hotel owner named Elizabeth Svensson bought a donkey named Naughty Face, mostly on a whim, while running a small hotel in Devon, England. Not long after, she visited a local livestock market and saw donkeys crammed into filthy, overcrowded pens, clearly neglected and unwanted. She started buying the ones in the worst condition. That small, almost accidental act of compassion eventually grew into what's now one of the largest equine welfare charities in the world, caring for thousands of donkeys and running veterinary and outreach programs across multiple continents. It's a reminder that shifting a stereotype thousands of years old doesn't always start with a scientific study or new legislation. Sometimes it starts with one person deciding that an animal everyone else had stopped noticing actually deserved better. And the science has increasingly backed up that instinct. Beyond memory and risk assessment, researchers have documented donkeys forming deep, specific attachments to companion animals, recognizing human emotional states and displaying genuine signs of grief, including withdrawal, reduced appetite, and visible stress after the loss or removal of a bonded partner. None of these traits, on their own, prove superior intelligence. But taken together, memory, social bonding, environmental awareness, careful risk assessment, and emotional depth, they describe an animal that is socially complex and cognitively capable, nothing like the flattened, cartoonish stereotype of a dumb, stubborn beast that culture has been repeating for centuries. So let's go back to where we started, to those 10 donkeys buried like royalty beside an Egyptian king 5,000 years ago. At the start of this video, that discovery looked almost inexplicable. But maybe it wasn't strange at all. Maybe the people who buried those animals with that much reverence understood something later generations simply lost sight of, that this cautious, patient, endlessly working creature had made their entire civilization possible and deserved to be honored for it. Because here's the deeper truth sitting underneath this whole story. Humanity didn't just forget the donkey. We misunderstood the very traits that made it valuable in the first place. We mistook caution for stupidity. We mistook quiet, unglamorous labor for low status. We handed one animal the myths, the statues, and the glory, and left the other one working in the background of nearly every major chapter of human history, expecting nothing in return. So here's a question worth sitting with. How many other quiet, overlooked forces in history, in nature, maybe even in your own life, have been carrying more weight than they've ever gotten credit for? Let us know what you think in the comments. We genuinely want to hear it. And if this changed the way you'll look at a donkey the next time you see one, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to Origin Tales if you haven't already, because there are a lot more forgotten stories like this one still waiting to be uncovered.